Today down in the comments, I want to hear your favorite HP Lovecraft film adaptation. Hello, I'm Adam Caesar. This is Project Black T-shirt, the channel where we take a new or a reissue horror film and pair it with a piece of horror literature that you will enjoy if you like that movie. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, make sure you subscribe. If you're already subscribed and you want another way to help me out, you can always buy my books, review them on Amazon, talk about them on Goodreads. That kind of stuff really helps, and it helps me keep the channel going. Today we are talking about The Color Out of Space, the brand new HP Lovecraft adaptation of one of his, I guess, most well-known, most adapted stories. But this one's a little different. It not only stars Nicolas Cage, Caging it up, but it is also the return to feature filmmaking for Richard Stanley, a director that I'm sure a lot of people out there really enjoy. His first two films, Hardware and Dust Devil, are really great pieces of oddball, outsider, sci-fi horror cinema. Went dormant for a little while because he was quite famously removed from the 1996 adaptation of The Island of Dr. Moreau. There's a great documentary about that kind of his fall from grace called Lost Souls. And this is his big comeback film 20-something years later. And because it does have that kind of comeback quality to it, and because Stanley has been making short films and documentaries and stuff like that, I was very leery for this film. It was a movie that I went to the theater to go see. It's a movie that had really good pre-buzz going in on like Twitter and Instagram, and people checking it out, and acquaintances telling me they liked it, but I still didn't trust them. There's this phenomena where independent films or films that get limited theatrical release or go to VOD or are made by genre heroes, they get this kind of built-in pass, and people are like talking about them and saying nice things about them online, even if the result is not great. I'm not naming names or naming films, but I feel like it happens a lot, and I feel like I go into some of these things and I'm very disappointed. And I go into every movie I see wanting to like it. That's why I catch flack here and on Twitter as like, oh, don't you dislike anything? Yeah, I dislike a ton of stuff. I just don't say anything. I just watch them and I'm like, we'll never speak of this again. But you can kind of see where this is going, because I really like The Color Out of Space. Really smart, really well done. This perfect mix of a movie that has interesting thematic depth and interesting performances, and has clearly some art behind making it, and clearly a filmmaker who is idiosyncratic and has something to say, and has waited 20 years to kind of say it in this interesting way. And it's just a gooey, gross, much bigger budgeted and full feeling body horror film than I thought it was going to be going in. So it's a movie. It took me by kind of complete surprise, and it was the opposite of that effect of like, oh, people are saying this is good, but I don't know, that trepidation. If you're in an area that's playing this in a movie theater, I would go check it out, because it's a good looking movie, and it really worked with surround sound and with a crowd. It was a fun movie. The plot, in brief, it opens with the surveyor who's checking out the water in the woods outside of Arkham, in this vaguely New England, vaguely Massachusettsy, vaguely Rhode Island-y town, and he's getting out into the boonies, out into the sticks, and he comes across a family living out there, and we meet them, and it is Nicolas Cage plays the father, plays the patriarch, but he's definitely not our perspective character. He's not the protagonist, even though his name's above the title on the poster. Our protagonist is his daughter, played by Madeleine Arthur. Jolie Richardson plays the mom. She's really good. And there's an older brother and a younger brother. They've got like a squatter on their property. It's a very kind of idiosyncratic setup, because when we first meet the daughter, she's doing a Wiccan magic ritual to try to cure her mother of cancer, to try to keep the cancer away, because Jolie Richardson's character it's implied, has had a double mastectomy, and this family's kind of coming back together after this health scare. So right away there's elements that clearly aren't in Lovecraft's story, that are clearly setting up, making this very contemporary and very modern, and it works incredibly. So this family surveyor comes and goes. He's checking out the water. There's these shots of the family drinking this well water that they're getting themselves, and we think, oh, and something's gonna happen. Then there is a cosmic event. It's not really a meteor crash because it is a color comes out of space. It's this purplish color, and this meteor crash lands in their backyard, works its way down into the water supply, and what follows is kind of descent into madness story, but it's not really done in that unreliable way of like is this happening or is this not? It's like it's definitely happening to these people, and it's also like a body horror story. On this land they have alpacas and they have a dog, and Nicolas Cage is farming tomatoes and things like that. So it's all this ecological terror set up. This is the kind of horror movie I really love, because it's not quite a slow burn because there's stuff happening at all times, but at least in the first 2/3, this movie has a very kind of laconic pace. We're getting to know these characters. We're getting to know the power structures within the family and the things that are eating at them, the things that are going wrong. We're introducing our themes where this family is inundated with bad news. There's a mayor in this town that's looking to do this giant public works project that's going to dam up the river. There's all this stuff kind of happening in the periphery, and all of it feels very modern, very now. It's global warming, it's terrible politicians, it's doom and gloom, it's the TV on all the time and being inundated with all this news and all this bad stuff happening, and its effect on this tight nuclear family and quite literally, begins to destroy them. And at the same time, it has all this clearly contemporary reading and clearly reading that works against some of Lovecraft's less okay views, and it still seems to like Lovecraft and it still seems to enjoy the world he's built. There's a ton of like little Easter eggs and references to other places, Miskatonic University and stuff like that, which is sometimes a little groan-inducing, but sometimes like, no, this is what Stanley likes, and he's enjoying making this movie, and he's enjoying kind of living in this world and building this world, even though it is a very claustrophobic story. You don't really move from the homestead at all. I will say, Nicolas Cage is very odd in this movie. He's always odd. This is different from something like Mandy, which I reviewed a little while ago, where Mandy felt like a Nicolas Cage vehicle. That's his movie. He is doing what he does very well, all the way to the hilt. He's an incredible performer when he's allowed to go in his odd directions. But here you have a movie that, especially by Richard Stanley standards, is kind of very low-key and naturalistic for a huge part of it. But you've got this odd performance from Nick Cage in this supporting role, to the point where you almost wonder, it's like, what is this supposed to represent? Why is he going so big, and why is he being encouraged to go so big in some of these scenes? And I'm not saying he's like miscast or anything, or I'm not saying that like the film would be better with a different actor. It would just be a clearly different film, and it would lose a lot of its oddness and these weird edges that it has, because there's a moment where he's doing an impersonation of the president, like, even though he's supposed to be becoming his dad in this weird way. He's struggling with his drinking. It's this almost meta performance in the middle of this pretty naturalistic kind of survival on a farm story. Special effects are really great. There's a good mix of CGI and once things go really bug nuts towards the end, some great animatronics and puppetry and monster effects makeup. It's got a really kind of downbeat, kind of hopeful, kind of interesting ending that I didn't really see coming, but doesn't feel tacked on because it's weaved it all the way through. I just really, really enjoyed this film. This week's book recommendation is The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle. This is a book that early on in the channel, when I was actually doing single book reviews, alternating that with movies, I did talk about this book in particular, and I'll link to that video, even though I'm sure I look even goofier back then. But this is a book I love. It's a quick little novella. It's perfect kind of counter reading to Lovecraft if you've got those the big annotated Lovecraft that they came out with a few years ago. It's refreshing and modern, and it takes the Lovecraftian elements seriously, but also doesn't kind of blithely give any kind of pass, and kind of engages with those antiquated stories in an interesting way. I really, really like it, and it's just a hell of a good horror story. I really like Victor LaValle's work. I really like his comic Destroyer, but this is still my favorite thing he's written, probably. Make sure you like and subscribe. I'll see you next week, where we'll talk more movies. And make sure, if you haven't already, please pre-order Clown in a Cornfield, coming out in August from HarperCollins. The big book. It's got a Clive Barker quote on it. Man, you're gonna love it. Go pre-order.